Hi, this is Dr. Scott Young, and today we're going to get into Tribulation, the groups. This is the second portion of this particular type of conversation. And this is from the new book on tribulation. So you can kind of go to Dr. Scott Young right below. You can see this on the screen. Tribulation, you can you can go to the website, go right to the website. You can find the book. You can also download, and I showed this to you before, but you can download in Tribulation, or excuse me, on drscottyoung.com. You can download on the screen, you can download this really kind of cool thing that is the wallpaper. Now, you can do that for free. You can actually you can donate to me. That would be helpful. I appreciate that a bunch. But you can do it for free if you feel like it. What that does, and if you have an elongated screen like I do, what it helps you do is see the different spots of the tribulation. I spent on the first one, the Hope in the Last Days, I spent 18 months. The second one's a little bit quicker. Probably took me about 6 months back and forth. And so that'll help you understand a little bit more about the tribulation. Now, the tribulation one was more specific about the events. What we're going to do here, because a lot of people didn't understand the groups, we're going to explain that a little bit more detail. Now, I'm still kind of arguing a little bit. My wife and I were talking about this the other day. We went to Texas Roadhouse and we were talking about whether we were going to release a second book that is going to talk about hope in the last days, that would have a little bit more about the groups, a little bit more about the Hope in the Last Days series, and a little bit of some of the tribulation kind of things. If you want to leave some conversation in the comments, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well. It would have some sections of tribulation, but it would have a lot more of the Hope in the Last Days series, and it would have a lot more of the groups. If you're interested in that, happy to hear your thoughts on that. But it would have a little bit of an overlap there. And some people kind of like, I'd have the tribulation book and I'd have the Hope in the Last Days series book, and it would be a little bit of an overlap. And some people go, why don't I have anything that overlaps? Well, you can't. You can't write like all new stuff because it's already, it's already completed. If that bothers you, that's fine. But if you'd say, well, I'd like to learn about it, even if there was some overlap in there, tell me what your thoughts are. Happy to hear it. Okay. So here, let's go into that, and we'll go through this. This one is going to be a longer episode. That helps people understand it a lot more. Now, we were not going to go through the other tribulation one, but you'll see some of the same charts in there too. Okay. So this is the introduction, the groups. Okay. So where do you see the groups? Because this is where it gets funky for a lot of people. They've never even heard of this. Okay. So these will make war against the Lamb, Jesus. The Lamb will conquer them because he is the Lord of Lords, the King of Kings. Those with him are called chosen, or are the called, the chosen, and faithful. This is Revelation 17:14. I reference this in the Tribulation series. Now, when you read conversations about that, people will say, expositors over the generations will say, well, that is specifically those with him are called, chosen, and faithful. And I go, well, yeah, but that's, and they say that's the church. And I go, not really. Because that's three separate words, and I'll explain that in a second. But some people will also kind of get confused because these will make war against the Lamb. The Lamb will conquer. Now, it's very interesting because in Revelation 6, verse 2, this other mythical character, it's not mythical, not in a bad way, like doesn't exist. It's a real character. The Antichrist comes to conquer. Well, in that circumstance, he has a bow but no arrows. Well, here the Lord comes and he is absolutely conquering. When he conquers, this would be an Armageddon in the very last, in the very last days. This would be in the great day of the wrath of the Lamb. If you listen to the other series, or if you know anything about it, this would be Yom Kippur. This would be an elongated day. This is not a 24-hour day. This might be 48, 72 hours. This would be like the Joshua's elongated day when Joshua stood up there and he has his arms raised, and then he'd get tired, and then people would kind of hold his arms up, right? That elongated day, as soon as the arms would go down, the Jews would lose the battle, and then they're like, well, prop his arms up, like, dude, man, I'm tired. Well, that's kind of the thing that happens in that circumstance. So you see, the Old Testament is the New Testament concealed. The Old Testament is the New Testament revealed. Okay, and that's why it uses those kinds of references with it too. So if you understand the called, the chosen, and faithful, these are kaleo, ekletos, and pistos. That's these are three separate words, but to put them together in the church kind of thing, it'd be like saying Larry, Curly, Moe. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to just, casually flip them together, and that just is zero makes sense, right? And that's why I kind of say, dude, it just doesn't make sense to throw them together with that too. These words, these masculine words, these masculine article, is very much like a group of people arrayed against Jesus. So when it says that they're conquering, that means that Jesus is fighting against the second coming. Okay. And so what happens here is that he's fighting against Armageddon, those who have taken the mark of the beast, with that too. Okay. Another reference is ho, which is the feminine word for these groups against Jesus. So this feminine group here, so Jesus, right? The article, Jesus is the masculine kind of thing versus the other ho, this little these particular groups, right, are this feminine kind of thing. It's just an interesting reference, and it indicates that these are part of that response of the bride, right? These groups are with Jesus, right? So they are part of that point. Okay. The calculation, what I believe that we get when we get all argumentative about pre-trib, post-trib, mid-trib kind of conversations, we get all calculation flawed. When we want to talk about this, we go, rapture plus the church means when. And so I see people, I'm going to pull this off the screen for a second. There's a friend of mine named Dr. Jeff Swanson, and he was talking to me way before I wrote this book. I mean, wrote the Tribulation book, before I was doing some of this stuff. He was at a pre-trib conference, and he was going to speak on this exact kind of topic. And so, and they brought in a post-trib guy, and they brought in a pre-trib guy, and at different times they were talking, and then other times they were doing direct, confrontation. I don't mean confrontation like they're bashing each other, but in essence, they were doing their little repartee, right? And so Jeff was talking about this, and he was going, I can solve this in like 5 minutes in essence, and Jeff and I were laughing, with this, and I'm like, I know it's so frustrating with this kind of thing too, because people always are struggling with this conversation because they keep doing the calculus or the calculation of this. they keep adding it up incorrectly, and there's so much. I mean, then people take a side because they're they get argumentative, and I go, but the word, inside of the word, I can come up with plenty of of post-trib rapture verses, and I can come up with plenty of pre-trib rapture verses, and I'll talk about them later on as we go through this. And so we keep thinking that rapture, and I can come up with rapture verses, right? And so we think that this is the calculational argument, right? Oops, sorry, click on the wrong area. And yet, I would say the calculation is innately wrong. Rapture plus when equals how. So then they go into this rapture plus when equals how. And so they get into these other things. But I would say, see, they're arguing over here in the red, right? So they try to answer the when and the hows. So they go rapture plus church equals when, rapture plus when equals how. So they try to answer the hows and the whens, but God never answers the hows and the whens. He has never answered the hows and the whens. And that's why people try to plug in all those particular answers. And I'm like, dude, you just don't answer that. But here's what God does answer. He does have rapture verses sprinkled throughout the New Testament, and frankly, even has them weirdly through the Old Testament. Now, very few of them, but a few. But he does talk about the who, and we'll explain that one in just a second. But he says the whys, and he also talks about the who, the whys. So guess what? God does not answer the when and the how, but he does answer the who and the why. And some of you are going, okay, I'm already confused. Okay, remember, there's a sets of verses in the Bible that always confuse the snot out of me. It's Romans 7, 15 through 25. I do not do the things I want to do, but those things I don't want to do, those things I do. And I'm like, I remember first several times I read it, I'm like, how many times are you going to say do? Okay, we're going to pause when we go through this. Stick with me, okay? When and how is not for you to know. Like, if you wanted to know when you are going to die and how you are going to die, or when you are going to meet your future wife or future husband, and how you are going to meet your future wife or future husband, God is never going to tell you that. Does that make any sense? But he might give you some of the answers of the why and maybe like a who, or specifically, I'm not going to tell you like the name, but give you some of the characteristics. Does that make some sense? Let's show you why it works this way. God never gives you those kinds of things. God tells you in Matthew 24, 4 through 6, he tells you, not yet. Matthew 24:22 says, if the days were not shortened, all flesh would not survive. But for the elect, it's called the chosen. The elect actually in Greek means chosen. Elect is another way of saying chosen. In Rosh Hashanah, the two priests controlled the days by blowing the horn at the new moon. Only only those two guys knew the exact moment of the timing. Why did they know that? The reason why they knew that is because in the time frame of the Old Testament, there was a moment in time where two guys would come into the camp and they would blow the horn at the wrong time frame, and the Jews were slaughtered. So what happened is they made up a new covenant point or a new conversation, and it was from God, by the way. This is the idea is that they would see the new moon, and so it was not an exact moment in time. The priest would do this, they would blow the horn, and so it was not an exact hour, day conversation, right? No one knows the hour or the day. That's why some people think it's Rosh Hashanah when Jesus comes back. Well, Jesus does come back, but not exactly how you think it is, right? But when you have 100 blowing of the horn, there is a complete rest, right? But this isn't the pre-tribulation rapture, because no one it must be fulfilled completely with Yom Kippur in 10 days later. And we talked about this in the other series, right? Exodus 19:19, the fulfillment is completed by the remnant of Christ. We'll talk about those guys later, okay? You will be to me a kingdom priests and a holy nation. This is what the remnant is called. And it's not fulfilled until the millennial reign of Christ. So Rosh Hashanah cannot be the pre-tribulation rapture that most end time people try to make it. Okay, so you can't put that one there, and this is what gets people all funked out. And by the way, this I'm recording this in January 31st, and you might be seeing this sometime in February of 2026. And by the way, in Rosh Hashanah of 2025, several people were saying Jesus is going to come back in Rosh Hashanah 2025, and I'm like, no, not going to happen. And of course, it didn't happen. And why was it not going to happen? Not for any of the other reasons that they were talking about. It was because of this issue that I was talking about. It wouldn't happen because I understood what Rosh Hashanah meant, not because I was like talking about 2025 or any other reason about 2025, but because I understood what Rosh Hashanah meant as a time frame. Okay? Rosh Hashanah is for the Jews, as is all the feasts. It's a variance between the spring feast, the 4 feasts, and the fall feasts with that too. Okay, let's go through the timeline like we did in the other series. The pre-tribulation rapture is for the bride of Christ. There's a reason for it. It's not just a fun thing for the church to go and an escape route that some people want to believe it for. It fulfills Jesus. We will talk about that as we go along. The Ezekiel 38 and 39 war actually has a reason for that. I talk about that in Hope in the Last Day series. Okay. Now, we don't get into this one in this series, but the Antichrist gets revealed. Actually, what's cool is the Ezekiel 38 and 39 war activates a lot of the Jews to get really mad. And I believe that the Antichrist is actually activated by Jesus to calm the Jews down upon the earth, and he becomes the first seal. Okay, and so he is coming to create a peace on the planet. Now it's a false peace for a time frame. Real interesting. In this first time frame, there's massive economic chaos in this time frame. There's reasons for that. In the middle period of time, the mark of the beast is required. Doesn't mean that the mark isn't maybe shown up in this time frame, but the mark of the beast is required here. And there is a hell on earth in the second period of the tribulation. It'll feel a little bit like it, but there are absolutely demons showing up left and right. Okay. The 7 seals, I talk about this in the other in the longer one. The 7 seals go from the beginning all the way, and they terminate at the very butt end of Yom Kippur. The 7 trumpets will start somewhere in the second half of the tribulation, or the midpoint. And the 7 bowls, the 7 vials will start maybe a month, maybe, 10 days ish, in that range all the way through. But notice that they all kind of go, and they all hit right near, and they all end at the same kind of time frame. And this is why Matthew 24 says that everything just is like when a woman is in the end of pregnancy, everything is just accelerating dramatically. Like everything is going like for a woman, right? It feels like everything is just getting dramatically worse in essence before that end comes. Well, that's what it feels like for women with that too. Okay. Now, then when we talk about this, and again, I'm not talking about a whole bunch of other things. We're focusing on the who's here. Okay, the 144,000. We'll talk about them. Begin here. They bring in the chosen, and then they go up. We'll talk about that. The called come here. The 2 witnesses and the angels are primarily related to be preaching to the called, and then they go up for the end. Okay, again, we're moving past those because I'll explain each one of those. Where can you see the groups? Well, first, we're going to talk about the bride. The bride, these will make war on the Lamb. The Lamb has conquered them because he is the Lord of Lords, the King of Kings. Now, it's so interesting when we think about the Lord of Lords, the King of Kings. Now, it says in Revelation 13:8, the Lamb was slain before the foundation of the earth. And I'm going to pull this off the screen for a second. It's so fascinating that most people don't always understand this. Before time ever began, the Bible was written. And after time ends, meaning the sun has already ended. I mean, heaven and earth will pass away, but but my word will never pass away. Matthew 24:35. And in Revelation 22, he terminates the sun, he terminates the moon, and a new heaven and a new earth come down. And what we believe is it's not a cube that comes down. It's more likely, fascinating, it's a pyramid. Oh, so cool. A pyramidal structure comes down and touches on the on the earth. So cool. So heaven, a new heaven touches on the earth. And so when it comes and touches on the earth, there is no more sun. It means that there would be no more time. There'd be no more 24-hour period, right? And so it means that there's no more living people anymore at that time frame, right? There's no more living people. Everyone, the white throne judgment is done. Everyone all the wicked are in the lake of fire. Hell is no more. Death has been taken care of. I mean, there's so many things that are so fascinating about this, right? And so, I mean, hell, demons, Satan, Antichrist, everyone are in the lake of fire. They're in the lake of fire, by the way, forever and ever. You don't have a termination of the lake of fire and the termination of the punishment, like some people want to say. But here's what happens is that it talks about this, that Jesus is the Lord of Lords from the foundation of the earth, but he has to have a point in time that he becomes the Lord of Lords. And that beginning of the Lord of Lords, or the creation of the Lord of Lords, is that when he comes down, first off, he becomes the Lord of Lords at the Rosh Hashanah, where he is crowned, by the way, is the coronation of the king. But when he steps onto the planet, okay, and he's stepping onto the planet in this verse here, right? So we're going to go back to this verse, Revelation 17:14. He's stepping onto the planet with his white horse. He's stepping onto the planet. He steps in, and the Mount of Olives is separated, right? I mean, when he steps on the planet, like earthquakes occur. That's why Yom Kippur and the Great Day of the Wrath of the Lamb, which is the same kind of day, that there are earthquakes occurring worldwide, but not only earthquakes happening worldwide, which is the I always have to like pause when I do this here. It's the sixth seal, seventh trumpet, third woe, seventh bowl. It's the whole thing. It also has the stars shaking. If you had if you were watching from heaven, which you won't be, but if you were watching from heavens, the heavens are going bonkers, shaky, shaky, right? I mean, if you were on Mars, if you were on, Europa, if you were on, some other planet, in some other, some other solar system, you would be having the same kind of shaking, right? Just because Jesus steps onto our planet in his godhood. Fascinating, right? Okay. I know I went off on that one, but I wanted you to see how amazing this circumstance is. Okay. This is how powerful this is. Okay. I know I've already gone over that little part there. But we are the bride of Christ. We are the faithful. That's what the pistos means. Pistis means with Pistis means faith. In Hebrews 11, verse 1, faith is the substance of things hoped for and the promise of things unseen. Pistos is a point of being. So when you are a point of being, you are bride. The bride here is a point of being. We are faithful because we are bride of being, not because we have perfection, but when Jesus says, be perfect as I am perfect, it's not because you have the ability to ever always be perfect, because it's when you're in the spirit, you have no ability to sin. And that will mess you up if you sit there and think about it, because you're not perfect because your flesh is perfect. You're perfect because you're inside of Jesus. And I know that will mess you up, and you got to think about that one for a while. Okay. The pre-tribulation rapture talks about the when and the how too. The rapture begins before the tribulation. Daniel 9:27. Daniel 9:27 talks about the week, a 1 week period of time. That's because that 1 week period of time is what the bride of Christ needs to be up in heaven. The pre-tribulation rapture of the bride aligns with passages of the bride. So let's talk about that one there for just a sec. So something that is used many, many times. Sorry, I didn't pull this up beforehand. Ephesians 5. Wives, submit to your husbands as Christ, as to the Lord. The husbands for husband is the head of the wife as Christ is the head of the church. Blah blah blah, and it goes on and on and on. And then he says, and he talks about this. And by the way, pastors love to do this when they do this when they do church when they get married, when people get married, right? And then in verse 32, he goes, this is a profound mystery. And I'm talking about Christ and the church. And he goes, oh. He's saying all of this is really the church. So when he talks about the church, it really is the bride. That's why I'm trying to tell you, you keep messing this up. And I'm saying not just you, but we all mess this up because we keep trying to call the church something different than what they really are. Revelation 1 to 3 says the church, but Revelation 4 through 19 uses a different set of words called the hagios, which is saying there's a different type of wording that happens. What is the separation? That separation, a difference, happens when in Revelation 4 verse 1, where John gets told there's a door that opens up in heaven. And he goes, come on up here. And he goes up and he moves into the spirit realm, into our future. And he starts talking in past tense, in our future, a past tense reference into our future. That is so amazing. First Thessalonians 4:16. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, and the archangel's voice, and the trumpet of God. And the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are still alive will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And therefore encourage one another with these words. And so people get this so messy. My mother-in-law and my father-in-law passed away. They have to, and by the way, we they both wanted uh, to be buried, and actually we uh, burned them and we put them at a mile marker in Colorado. So they're both right by this one tree. We actually have the mile marker so we can always remember it, right? So they're mixed with a couple of the dogs, right? So God will mix them perfectly together, right? So and whoop, they'll be going up, but they go up first. It's fascinating. So we're not going to go before them. They go up first, right? So in essence, we're not. They come down from heaven. They're preparing the wedding feast in heaven. They come down, get their bodies, and they come. And there's a long cool things with this because they have to have a new body to come to be married to Christ. Why? Because in John 20, he says, John 19 to 20, he says, do not touch me because I haven't changed into my new form. And when he was allowed to be touched, he was then, and Thomas is the first one really to talk about this touch my hand. Then he was into his new form. He had to have a new body. Why would you have to do this? Because you have to have that same body reference. This is a marriage that the two will become one flesh. This is a marriage conversation. Man, so many times in the New Testament, he talks about there will be no more marrying and giving in marriage in heaven. Guys, you got to see that we will be married to Christ. This is why the church keeps messing this up. We will be changed in a moment without death. The Shroud of Turin is just another viewpoint of this. In the Shroud of Turin, when we had the Shroud of Turin, by the way, and I could do a whole long story, but I don't want to go too far in this one. In the Shroud of Turin, we actually have, in just milliseconds, Jesus is warped to the speed of light with incredible amount of energy that comes out of every pore of his body with um with nuclear level energy coming every pore of his body. He warps to the speed of light. That level, and I think it's in John 20, verse 1. And people say that the stone rolls away. That isn't even what the verse says in Greek. It says the stone arrow, Aero. That's where we get the original word for aeroplane. The stone doesn't just roll away, the stone like blows away, like for instance from a grenade blast. That would be what we would say. That in essence the dynamo, it was blown away. So if the dudes were standing around, the guards, the dude guards standing around there, they would have been blasted out of the way, in essence. So this change in a moment, if people are standing around it, they would be they could easily be blasted out of the way. And in the Left Behind series, we see people that, oh, the clothes are all nice and neat folded. I just don't see it. I think that there's going to be a dynamis, a arrow kind of like blasting. I mean, that's what's happening in the spirit realm. That's what happened to the Shroud of Turin. They're going to see an event that maybe all of our clothes are going to have some level of Shroud of Turin kind of event. I mean, that's very possible. That's what it tells you. That's what happened to Jesus when he had his grave clothes on. Could that be one of the events that come up? It's a very powerful point. Our bodies are warped to the speed of light. Possible. Okay. Reasons for the pre-tribulation rapture. Why would the church be around if God is mobilizing the 144,000 Jewish evangelists? I mean, people always, talk about this. Why do you have the 144,000 Jewish evangelists? I mean, he's bringing on 144,000 Jewish evangelists who are, and we'll talk about them in just a little bit. But why do you do that? If we're supposed to still be here during the time frame, it makes zero sense. You can't come up with a good reason for that. 2 Thessalonians 2, 9 and 10 indicates the Antichrist cannot appear until the church is removed. Sorry, just doesn't happen. The 7-year period of time is the church removal aligns perfectly with the wedding feast. What the heck is that? Let me kind of pull this off the screen. Jesus shows up in his first time frame, and his very, very first miracle is changing the water into the wine. And when Jesus is going to a wedding. In the wedding, they have a private wedding ceremony. They have sexual relationship so that they can bond themselves, and they do a 7-day wedding feast. Guys, this is what we will be doing. There's a wedding ceremony in Revelation 4. They give gifts to one another. We will talk about that in a little bit. There's a ceremony and there's a 7-day wedding feast, 7-year. It's the same kind of thing. We'll talk about that in a little bit here. Oops, sorry. The tradition of the wedding feast. The friends introduce the groom to the bride. This is what they do. It's not like a father does this. This is normally how it works. Okay, the friends introduce a groom to a bride. The prospective groom introduces himself to the father, and the dowry is produced. So they negotiate out a dowry to release her out of the father's household. Now, this isn't buying her, but I want you to think about it like this. In the KHL, this is the Hockey League of Russia. And this happens all the time. So a guy he's a real good hockey player. And he's got a contract in the KHL, but he wants to play in the NHL, and he's raising up his game well enough. So, and my favorite team is the Colorado Avalanche. And let's just say the Colorado Avalanche want to play. Now, the KHL actually has an agreement that there is a buyout clause capability to go from the KHL to NHL. Okay? Pull off screen for a second. So in the KHL kind of thing, the buyout clause, there is some certain circumstance. Let's just say he's got a 3-year, $1.5 million deal, and the buyout clause would be half of that $1.5 million deal. Let's just say he's partway through it. Just say the buyout amount would be, a portion of that thing. So instead, they'd have to pay, of that amount. Let's just say it's $500,000. So Colorado would have to write a check for $500,000 to the KHL team, dowry, $500,000. Then he gets to write an agreement for a contract with Colorado. Let's just say it's a 2-year deal, $4 million a year, so $2 million or $8 million contract over a 2-year period of time. But he had to get written out by Colorado. So this is an NHL, KHL kind of contract. So this is the way that they do it, right? He has the right to go to the NHL. He can stay in the KHL. He has every choice in the matter here, but he wants to go to the NHL. Do you see what I'm saying? Okay. But he's under contract in the KHL. Now, this is the same exact thing here. The bride here is the daughter, and she's inside of the father's household. This is very important. It's not just she's not a slave in here, but she's integral in the father's household. It wasn't just being the daughter. And don't think of like Islam, how they do it. This is like how the whole community even survives. This is how the whole community actually does business, survives and does business, and stays alive. So they have, let's say 3 daughters and 2 sons. And so to make it through the next year, she's met this guy, and she really likes this guy. She's fallen for the guy, and the guy goes, "Hey man, I can come up with this amount of money, and would you accept it?" And the father's going, "Okay, it better be X amount more. Okay, come up." And they go back and forth, and they haggle, and they come up with the amount of money to be able to do that. And it's got to be able to be enough for them to release in essence, the contract, right? This is a contractual relationship, but it's got to be good for both sides. And that's what happens. That's the dowry release. Okay. All right. Oop. Whoa, I just messed up. Sorry. Okay. Let me go back. All right. So now the bride has to make the commitment to the groom. Excuse me. So she has to now make the commitment saying, okay, the dowry is released. I'm now making the commitment. That's the signature, just like in the KHL to the NHL. Now he signs the NHL agreement, right? For the 2-year, $8 million deal, in essence, right? So he's making the commitment. She, in essence, that new NHL contract, she's making the commitment to the new groom, right? So now here's what she does. She puts a lamp in her window for the waiting for her groom. This is so cool. And where do we see this? We see this in Matthew 25. And we see this in the foolish versus the wise virgins. There's several things. The wick in the lamp, and we have oil in the lamp, and the lamp. What is that? The lamp. That is the new spirit within you. The wick is the thing that mixes between the oil. What's the oil? The Holy Spirit. That's reading the word. Now, who don't have drain out the oil? The goats. We'll talk about the goats later on, so don't just put your little spot in your notebook here about the goats, okay? But she's got to have her lamp lit upstairs, and she holds on to that. And so she's got to have the groom creates. Oh, sorry, let me go backward here for a second. Oop. So she's got to have the lamp in the window, and what it does is it calls out to the other young bucks around town, going, "Dude, I'm already engaged. Get away from me!" Right? Get away from me. It's like it flipping off the other young bucks. That's why even in today's culture, a woman puts an engagement ring on, saying, "Get away, get away, get away. Don't bug me. I'm engaged." Right? But if she didn't have her lamp in the window at night, she was available. Okay? That's why when women walk around without a wedding ring or without an engagement ring, they're available, right? So someone wants to buy them drinks, on and on. You get the idea. Okay. The groom then has to go and create a house for his bride with his father's permission. This is John 14:7. He says, Behold, I go prepare a place for you, and then I'm going to come back for you. This is, and they all knew it. But we don't even perceive it because we didn't know we didn't understand the Jewish traditions. And we're not, that's why we've been arguing about pre-trib and post-trib stuff. Stop arguing about that stuff. The friends of the groom then come into the town when it's ready and time. When the father says it's time, then they come in and they blow the trumpet. 1 Thessalonians 4:16. Who's blowing the trumpet? The friend blows the trumpet upon the arrival at the right time. We'll talk about who the friends are. By the way, the friends, they know the exact right time frame. They're told to blow the trumpet at the right time frame. The bride then comes down, showing her that she's faithful and she's had the oil in her lamp. That means she's been reading the word, she has the Holy Spirit in her, blah blah blah. She's all set up and ready. She has been faithful. She's not had sex with other men, blah blah blah. You get the idea. That 7-day wedding feast happens after the ceremony, right? And they live for 1 year rent free in the house. That's the millennial reign of Christ. This is so cool. This is so amazing. The importance of the wedding. This is a desire for Jesus to have a complete intimacy with the creation. He wants it just as much and frankly more than we do. But we have to have the right time. There's actually a story of the shoemaker. I want to tell you a little bit of a story of the shoemaker. There's actually a really cool thing that happens, that the shoemaker comes at the right time to make the shoes for the people. So he comes and makes the shoes for all the right people around us. So when we have that kind of thing happening and he's making the shoes perfectly fitted for the people. That's part of what the friends are doing. You out there for the friends of the people. I think that's where we're nearly there. That the friends around and the other people are seeing the shoes, which is the word of God, being made for the people, being preparing themselves for the wedding. Oh, so cool. Okay. Oops. His completion of the work of the cross is the dowry He doesn't come and pay with money. He did it by the work of the cross. That is the only thing. The God of the universe has all the money in the world, right? Or all the money in the universe. But his work on the cross is the dowry that he could give. See, when Satan brought him up to the top of this mountain and said, "I'll give you the world," he's like, I don't need the world. I'm going to come and get the world. That's why he doesn't respond back to Satan when he says he's going to give you the world, because he goes, I'm going to walk on the world, and when it happens, I'm going to destroy this planet, and it's all going to be mine anyway. He doesn't say anything to him. I'm going to give my blood in a bit. Sex is that commitment, that connection with our spouse, something that only happens in the spirit. Only Jesus explains that mystery to us. Okay, like we said before, pre-tribulation rapture, the Ezekiel 38 and 39 war. We can talk about that later. The Antichrist seal, economic chaos, mark of the beast, hell on earth, the seven seals, the seven trumpets, the seven bowls, the 144,000, the chosen. We'll explain them, how they go up, the called, the angel and the two witnesses, they go up. Okay, now let's talk about the 144,000. The 144,000 are such a fascinating group of people that so many people have faked this group over the centuries, actually, have said, oh, I'm part of that group. And they are not. They are very specific in scripture. I heard a pastor that said, that she is part of the remnant. and they say they use these calming they use these calming words. But we are not the remnant. And here's the evidence of the remnant that we really need to get to. Now, in the Old Testament, the Jews are specifically the ones that were married to Christ, or married, to God, because they came out of the wilderness. They were married. There's all kinds of strong conversations of married of God. Sorry, I'm getting really kind of coffee here. Some peppermint. Trying to reduce the cough. So and then when they went to wandering, especially the wandering in the wilderness kind of thing, that's that wandering spirit. That wandering kind of thing brought them into that sheep kind of category kind of thing. And that is that divorcing that God did to the Jews. So you see that same kind of response that God did. The rise of Christianity brings us to that feeling of that divorcing. And so, and I'm not going to really get too far into the Ashkenazi Jews, but in the more recent time frame, and I would say in the last 1,000 to 1,500 years, we get into the cabal that has risen up over the last century or so, that have grown in the Rothschilds and those kinds of groups of people who um, have brought in this idea that they are the new Jews, and frankly, they're not. They're a gross part of Jews who say they're Jews, but they're really not. And I think that God is really taking care of them in this time frame, because when we come into biblical time frame, that the time frame that is about to come in the end times, we're going to see the real remnant of Jews that are going to rise up, that are the final remnant that is to come. The evidence against this 144,000, the church kind of tries to bring out this conversation. The tribulation is changing back to Jewish time frame. So there's this outward focus, the 144,000, the remnant, so, and I don't really want to get into this too much here, but um, we could talk about this too much, but I really don't want to get too far into this. But people try to say that they're part of the church, and I just go, you cannot get too far into this. But I could go off on that one a hundred different ways with that too. Okay. The important contextual context is the word does not dismiss the Jews in part of the fall feasts. They are fulfilled for them. And the fall feasts they really have to deal with the end time issues. They're fulfilled for them. The fall feasts are not for the Gentiles. The fall feasts people try to bring us the church or the bride into the fall feast, and they are not for us. They are only for the Jews. Characteristics of the 144,000. The four angels were empowered, this is in the sixth trumpet, to harm the earth. But they're not allowed to touch the 144,000. It's very, very interesting. Now, I'm not going to be able to say this word in Greek here. They're sealed. And so I want to show you a couple different points. They're sealed, they're authorized, and they're notarized. So I'm going to pull this off the screen here. I want you to kind of see this. And I'm just going to use some different kinds of things. Their attestation. There has an attestation stamped. Okay. They're notarized, like a notary republic. So in essence, there's a sealing, they're a notary of them. They're so sealed of God, it's not funny. Now, it's not necessarily the seal of God, but they're authorized like a bank sealing of God. It's such an interesting point that it talks about this in Revelation 7, that somehow God seals them, that they're not able to be harmed. It's so interesting. Like when the bank goes and does a seal, it legitimizes the witness signature. And sometimes you have to go do that. Sometimes you have to sign a document and it says that really is the person. Now, we have all kinds of interesting things that are happening right now when we see some signatures right now, like Trump is doing this with this auto pen conversation, and we've seen this with Biden with his auto pen kind of nature. And there's a really interesting point that you look at some of the nature of Biden's signatures, they don't even line up to his old signatures in the past, which tells you some of the fake nature of the Biden signatures of the past versus the signatures that he has right now. And so without getting too off on the topic, it means that every single thing that Biden during his time frame from 2020 to 2024, it invalidates every single thing that he and his administration actually signed. So if the notary kind of thing in the background, if they haven't really stamped those things correctly because they use this auto pen nature, then how is it legitimate in essence? But here's what they did. Oops, sorry, let me pull it off the screen. Here's what God does. God takes this real 144 and goes, bam, stamps the seal of approval upon these people, instead of all the fakery that has been done of the past. Isn't that really cool? That's what the word actually says. Now, the seal is a strong statement that they are the only one that has the ability to preach. This is the characteristic of these people. And these are sealed because the bride is gone. They are gone to do a different job, meaning you and me are gone to do a different job. Now, there's a fascinating second seal of these people. It says that there's another thing, that in Revelation 7:14 and 15, they're standing before the throne serving God day and night. There's a really, you go, okay, what does that mean? The text mistakenly views, some people looks at these as martyrs, but which comes in the fifth seal. That is not correct. The fifth seal is in Revelation 6, 9, and 11 through 11. That's a different conversation. It says they're going to reach a critical mass conversation. How would they stand before the seal later on? This is in Revelation 7. Here's the point about these people. What are they doing at the throne room at this particular time frame? Because if you read the conversation, see they're sealed and they can't be harmed, but somehow they're in the earth, they're sealed by God, and then somehow they're in heaven. How do they go from not being able to be harmed and then somehow transported into heaven, serving God night and day? They're ministering in their priestly role, and then they're suddenly at the throne room of God. This is really very interesting how they don't go how they go into this kind of thing. So they move into a different circumstance. Now, here's what I'm going to tell you about these guys. They're now in heaven. See, there's only two ways to go from our circumstance of life, living in the world. We have to live in the world and then we die, right? Which is called death. Or we're transported, which called harpazo, which is that point of pulling out of the earth. Harpazo, which is called rapture. So somehow these people are raptured off of the planet. This is the second rapture event. So this is another reference of the rapture. Enoch in Genesis 5:24 actually had the same thing. He was walking with the Lord for 365 years, and then suddenly he's gone. Elijah in 2 Kings 2:11 and 12 is with God, and then there's this chariot of fire, and then boom, he's gone. And he says to Elisha, if you watch me go in that chariot, or you watch me go off of the earth, then you'll get a special blessing. Oh, okay. So like Elisha's going, okay, dude, I'm going to be watching for that one, right? Which, by the way, is another reference to the 144,000. If you see me going through this, that is a special blessing. That's probably another reference to the 144,000. If Elijah would be a reference to the bride, Elijah, the bride, to 144,000. If maybe that is another way of saying, if you guys see me leave, then you get a special blessing. What? Maybe the 144,000 get the blessing for that. It's another way of thinking about it. They're taking in the same character. That character context with that too. Jesus several times is taken up. Last time in Acts. So Jesus goes in that portion in in Matthew. He leaves in the same way. Okay. So this is, we see rapture verses, pre, mid, and post. that happen the same way. Okay, so if they cannot die, they clearly, and they move to heaven. This is their part of the mid-tribulation rapture. So here's what happened. They show up in Revelation 7 and 14. Okay. They are part of Revelation 7 verse 9. Let me show you what 7 verse 9 is. I had to pause you right there so I could kind of go grab my Bible. 7 verse 9 is this. After this I looked, and there was a vast multitude from every nation, tribe, people, and language, which no one could number, standing before the throne, before the Lamb, and they were robed in white, with palm branches in their hand. Okay, so here's what I want you to see. If you flip back before this, Revelation 7:3 talks about don't harm the earth, the trees, until the seal of God seal of the slaves, which is doulos, of God is on their forehead. And then it lists out the number of the sealed, or 144,000, blah blah blah, and then it kind of lists out all the different 144,000. Very next verse is verse 9. And then it says, after this I looked. Now, in English context, one of my degrees is English. After this I looked. Now, when you use that kind of adverbial phrase, it means after this, right? He's saying, in reference to those verses, after this I looked. So he's talking about the 144,000. There was a vast multitude from every nation, tribe, people, and language. So this isn't just referring to the 144,000, but it's referring to all of a chosen generation, all the elect. We're going to talk about the elect here in just a little while, or the chosen, which no one could number, standing before the throne, before the Lamb. That is not what some people would call the martyrs. They were robed in white. White would mean that they're pure. Okay. Now, again, some people would think that these would be in Revelation 13. There's a different set of verses. These people are white. Where do they come from? And this is, well, sir, they washed their robe white, made them white with the blood of the Lamb. And seeing this is a slightly different conversation with it too. So this is a different set of conversations that happen all the way through. This is very unique in how it writes it. This is the mid-tribulation rapture. This is a great, cool verse that comes out in this way. Okay. A fourth characteristic of the 144,000 I think is so fascinating. I've been one of those weird people that have sang in probably 2 or 3 dozen weddings. What's what most people don't know about me is I'm a wedding singer. And I've sang in probably 1,000 different times in churches and other ways, right? So Revelation 14, 3 and 4, which is another weird sets of verses that talk about the 144,000. They learned a song that no one else could sing. And it's talking about the 144,000. They know a song that no one else can sing. Like, why would they sing a song? I want to tell you a story. I'm just going to pause and tell you my wedding singer story. It's just kind of fun if you don't mind. I'm going to pause. So I had written songs for every single wedding, all the way from high school through college, every single person. And so I was painting my parents' house and barn for the summer. And I'm in the middle of this, and I remember it was Tuesday, and I got a call, and this is during the 80s, so it's not like cell phone time frame, right? And I get a call, and it's in south of Denver. So a friend of mine calls me, and she goes, "My sister's wants to ask you a question." Okay. And so her sister gets on the phone. She goes, "Can you come up to Sterling, which is a good 3.5 4 hour drive up there, and would you sing for my wedding?" And I'm like, "Well, sure, I would." And she goes, "It's this Saturday." I'm like, "Oh gosh, okay, well that's." She goes, "My the worship pastor bowed out of the wedding, and okay, well." She goes, "You can sing any song you want to," and I'm like, "Okay, any song you want to." I'm like, "Okay, hold on, just tell me what songs they are." And she says, "Well, there was this song, this song, this song. So these three songs." And I'm like, I said, "Well, I know that song. I've sang that one. This song I know pretty well, and the other song, I bet you I can get it." And so I go to the local Christian bookstore, and I said, "Man, I got this wedding. I'm doing this." And he goes, "I'll get you the songs, and I'll let you borrow it." It's our tapes, right? And so I like go 4 hours with three songs, and I play them over and over and over again, right? And I mean, that's three songs. We're talking 3 minute, 3 4 minute songs, singing them until my throat is dry, right? So I get up there and I sing. I'm like, "Can I please like do it in front of everyone? For the wedding rehearsal on Friday night." And they go, "Yeah." And she's like, "Oh, you're better than the other guy doing it." It was a really kind of cool thing. I got to meet some people I never met before, but it's such an interesting thing to be a wedding singer because you're part of the wedding crowd, but you're not really part of it. You're always on the side. And it's such a fascinating thing to be the wedding singer. So I'm just telling you, to be that, it's a unique response to see part of that, of a part of the wedding crowd. And to be part of the wedding, you see everything a part of it, you get a unique response of it. And it's such a wild situation too. So sorry to kind of go off on a little topic there with that, but I believe that in my own heart, I believe that these are part of the wedding administrations of this. So that's my own thought with that too. Okay. Um, but here's the other part of this, that it says that these young Jewish men never have had sex with women. They have, instead of angels where they're devoted, they have a priestly devotion. So this is something that's very interesting. Even the Left Behind series gets this very, very wrong, where they have one of their main characters who, and I'm blanking on the name of the character in there, that he loses his family, and that's part of the incorrect nature of some of the Left Behind books that have the uh, people who are part of the 144,000. They cannot have sex with a woman. And so this is the coolest part that you have to see about them. They are very, very set aside for this. Okay. Two groups that some people don't know. The 144,000, again, young Jewish men, opposite of the Left Behind series, never been with a woman. They evangelize the whole world, and they're chosen from the foundation of the earth. This is so amazing. That's how God is, right? Versus the chosen. Now, who are they? We'll talk about this. Let's talk about them. These ones are the ones that learn about God after the bride is gone. These are the people that start to learn about God in that first half of the tribulation. You see, they don't know anything. They've been playing church possibly all the way through, so they exist, right? Maybe they've been going to church. Maybe they've been acting like they've been playing church. Now, see, the Left Behind series actually does a really kind of cool job about these people. They kind of act like they've been playing church, right? But they're going to actually experience some level of persecution. And I'm going to show you a verse that talks about them in a unique way. Let's get to a verse and we'll show you this one. And I'm going to read this to you and then we're going to explain it a lot more deeply. And I'm going to read this to you and then we're going to come back and talk about this. But those, and it's Luke 12:48. But the ones who did not know and did things deserving of blows will be beaten lightly. But much will be much, but will be required of everyone who has been given much, and even more will be expected of the ones who have been entrusted with more. Oh, it's like, okay, whoa, wait a second. Will experience persecution like the Chinese have gone through. It occurs due to the timing of when they believe. It's not because we're exclusionary in this way. Let's talk a little bit about this group. So again, the Luke 12:48 verse. Okay. They didn't know. What didn't they know? Well, they didn't know Christ. That's essentially the point. It's not because they were bad people. They didn't know Jesus. Some blows. Let's talk a little bit about this. I'm going to pull this off the screen. What does that mean? That means it's some blows means deserving of blows will be beaten lightly. We're not talking about that. They are going to have some persecution. And when they say persecution, we're talking about they are going to be beaten for their faith. Now, some people might have some level of martyrdom. We're going to say persecution. We think we've had persecution. They're going to have persecution in ways we haven't imagined yet. Now, we're going to talk about a persecution later on of the called, the martyrdom of the next group that you can't imagine. But these people are going to have a persecution in ways losing jobs, losing family members, being ostracized in ways you're just haven't, you can't imagine yet. They're going to have significant hardships that are going to come. There is a severe deception that happens in Matthew 24:24. It says this. Let me flip over to that. False messiahs and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders and lead astray, if possible, even the elect. Elect and chosen are the same word. They are the ones dealing with a severe deception. You are not dealing with severe deception. You're dealing with deception, no question, but nowhere near like they're dealing with. Deception that you can't imagine. These are called chosen believers by false prophets. This is called ekletos, or hagios is another way of saying saints. They're a new definition of believers. They are going to be hardened in ways you have not gone through. Jesus comes along with his own, and they are part of this group. The called, the chosen, ekletos, and the faithful. This is this middle group of people. This new rapture, this middle rapture, Peter talks about it, 2 Peter 2:7-9. It rescues the people out of judgment. 7 verse 9, we talked about this, Revelation 7. After this I looked, and that from every tribe, every nation, every language. And in Luke 12:38, if he comes in the middle of the night or even near the dawn, In the middle of the night is another reference to the middle of the time frame. I'm telling you, this is a middle time frame point. Some people go, wait, two raptures? That doesn't even fit, does it? Yes, it does. The first rapture fulfills 1 Thessalonians 4:16 through 18. We talked about that one. They are complete in their faith. The purpose of the rapture is choice. They had a choice to believe at the time frame. The bride must be in heaven for 7 days or 7 years to fulfill the bride point. The second rapture of the chosen and the 144,000 was proposed actually by Hilton Sutton and actually another guy named Perry Stone. The chosen are actually a very interesting group called the guests at the wedding feast. I'm going to talk about this one in a minute. Mark 13:27 says, He will send out his angels and gather his elect from the four winds. And then I want to show you this one here. Matthew 22:1 through 13. This whole set of verses seriously makes no sense. And I want to just read them to you here. Just want you to sit back and look at them for a second. Sorry, let me just pull this off the screen. I just want you to sit back and read it. You can read it with me if you like to, okay? So once more, Jesus spoke to them in parables. The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a wedding banquet for his son. Okay, so think about this for a second. Kingdom of heaven compared to a king. Now he's focusing on the king. The father gave a wedding banquet. The banquet is in the middle of the time frame, not the beginning, the middle point of the banquet. It's not in the very beginning, but the middle time frame for son. So it's not about the son. The son is nowhere in this conversation. The bride isn't anywhere, and the groom isn't anywhere in this conversation. Do you catch it? He sent out his slaves to summon the invited. The invited would be the kaleo, the called, to the banquet, but they didn't want to come. Oh my gosh, this is so cool. The called don't want to come. The called don't want to come, but they are going to come later on. We'll talk about those. And again, he sent to other slaves and said, Those who were invited, look, I prepared a dinner. My ox and fatted calf have been slaughtered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding banquet. But they paid no attention, went away, and one to his farm and the other to his business. The other seized the slaves, treated them outrageously, and killed them. This would be actually called the goats. The others, the king was enraged, so he sent out the troops, destroyed the murderers, and burned down the city. So that would probably also be the wicked as well. He told the slaves, the banquet is ready, but those who were invited were not worthy. We will talk about them in Luke 12:47. Therefore, go to where the roads exit the city and invite everyone you find to the banquet. So the slaves went to the roads and gathered everyone they found, both evil and good, and the banquet was filled with guests. Guests. Oh my gosh, you guys you gotta go find. People came, they were good and evil. Oh, guess what? People are going to come to the wedding feasts. And when they came in to view the guests, he saw that there was a man not dressed for the wedding. Oh, we will come back to him in a little bit. Friend, how'd you get to the wedding without your wedding clothes? The man was speechless. Then he told the attendants, tie up the man hand and foot, throw them out into outer darkness. Oh, weeping, gnashing of teeth. Oh, we'll talk about him. Verse 14. Many are invited, but few are chosen. If you don't understand, if you don't understand the wedding, and you don't understand the wedding feast, and you don't understand a mid-trib rapture, this should blow your mind. Most people read these verses, and if you think about just a pre-tribulation rapture, you don't get it. If you think about it as a post-tribulation rapture, you sort of, right? I'm telling you, there's some cool verses, but we don't spend any time on it because we don't understand this. This is some cool stuff. This is exciting, fun stuff. The wedding guests are the chosen. They were invited for the wedding. Their whole job is to show up for the wedding of the universe. Oops, sorry. Their whole job of the wedding guest are to go up and be part of the wedding of the century. So the chosen, their whole point, the bride is to be there. The wedding chosen are to be there to be the wedding guests at the feast. And the 144,000, I believe personally, is to be ministering at the throne and maybe to be actually the singers of the wedding. I don't know. Kind of cool, right? How cool is that? God's got a purpose for every single person. He's not being exclusionary in a second rapture point. He's just going, you didn't believe at the right time, but guess what? I got a purpose for you. And he even starts getting a purpose for the next set of people, the called, the kaleo. Let's show you about them. So the second half of the tribulation, we're going to do this kind of quickly with this part. The second seal is the World War III. If you don't know about this one, you got to read or watch the Tribulation series. This is where as many as a quarter of the planet die. Through this, the hyperinflation, the famine, that could be 1.875 billion people are going to die. The fourth seal, these are all part and parcel with one another, that the death, and again, the quarter of the planet are dying. The called are going to die through the martyrs. And at the same kind of time frame, we got the first trumpet, the hail and the fire are coming down, where a third of the planet is being burned. The second trumpet is happening with comet, and the volcanic ash is hitting over the planet with tsunami or going around because of the comet. A third of the sea is getting destroyed. The third trumpet, with a third of the waters are going bitter. There's a hell on earth that's happening. The 7 bowls are happening at near the end of the time frame. So these trumpets are going on, and 7 bowls are happening at the same time frame. So we got all that stuff is going on here. Okay. So the basic conditions on the last 3.5 years, the mark of the beast is required for all the transactions. There's a gradual grief that occurs in war. I'm going to tell you, if you make it, not you, but if you are making it at this time frame, you haven't even had time to grieve. I mean, like you're just sitting there going, I don't even know how to like take time to grieve, because like my uncle died, my grandma died. I mean, like now my parents have died, my kids have died. I mean, like everyone around you is dying so fast that you haven't even paused. Do you know that there's a series called Band of Brothers, and Stephen Ambrose. I just had to remember his name. He actually said that the 82nd Airborne guys would talk about this. They said that they're in the middle of the foxholes, and some of their friends had died, and because they had to move on, that it was a year later or 2 years later after the war that they finally started to grieve some of the men that they lost because they couldn't even stop to grieve their best friends that died. That's what it's like. And these people are going to be in almost constant depression, grief, everything else. They're in absolute difficulty trying to make it through. There's chaotic crimes occurring in apocalyptic movies that happen. And there's a few of the apocalyptic movies get it correct, but very few of them kind of get this thing. People who you would say do it kind of correctly, and some of the zombie movies sort of get them right. That were like old bankers and decent kind of people are now like some of the worst people you'll see out there. um, and just utter crimes that you would never imagine pre-apocalyptic timeframes now just are normal. Just happen everywhere around you, and I believe that that will happen again in that last 3.5 years. They're just because there will be no more police force available because they're all gone. I just think there'll be just full-on anarchy in areas. Um, like the Matthew 24 says, pregnancy cycle happens. Each trimester comes along. It's just more difficult as you go along. I mean, women notice. Not a woman, so I'm not going to say this, but I noticed how my wife noticed this too. Is that you just don't even recognize how your body is. It's just so much worse in that time frame. No, listen, women kind of, some women just forget about how much they went through in their pregnancy, but it's so much more difficult on your body with that too. It's a lot that goes through it. There are plagues, and let's just kind of even talk about. I'll just give you a basic thing. I mean, not even going through. There's bloody sea, there rivers of blood, killing heat, darkness of pain, crops burning, demons on the loose. Right? These are just some of the basic conditions that are going on around you. Right? But let's get into the converts of the called. Again, Luke 12:47. Let's flip over to that. 12:40. God, it takes me a second. Okay. And that slave who knew his master's will and didn't prepare himself or do it will be severely beaten. So knew his master's will. It means knows about the end. Apocalyptic. Didn't prepare himself. Now, this one made me pause when I started to look at the Greek meaning of the word. It's the exact same word that we would use for prepper. Now, again, the people who would translate the Bible for years and years would never understand what that word means until the last 40 or 50 years. And as a guy who has actually gone to many a gun show in the time frame, there's a gun show in the Tulsa area called Wanamaker's. And if you have never gone to a gun show, you are missing out, because I started to bring my own company out to the Wanamaker gun show, and you'll never experience anything like that. So when people want to sell their own rifles, so they would bring out their own rifle. They have to have a zip tie, and they have to unload their rifle, right? So they can't bring in their own. They have to make sure they're unloaded, right? And so they zip tie the trigger, and so and then you'll see they'll have their AK-47 or whatever AR, and it's very interesting. And so they're in full camo. You're like, it's real interesting the first time you do it. And then they'll have like it looks like a little American flag, like a stick. And it looks like a little American flag, and the stick on it says like an AR whatever. If let's say it's an AK-47 on it, it's like a little American flag, and it will say stipulate the type of rifle they're selling, and $643 or OBO or best offer, right? And you're just watching them go by, and you're like, and one of the time frames right across from me is this massive rifle, and it's a 50 cal with an amazing barrel, and I'm picking it up, and I've never picked up any rifle, and I've shot shotguns all of my life, right? All kinds of different ones. I mean, the biggest one I ever shot was a 30-06, but I can barely hold this thing up, and I'm holding it up, and I'm looking down the the sighting of this thing, and I can see. And he goes, you probably could see probably a mile to 2 miles off of this. Oh my gosh, I could. I mean, I'm guessing, right? I'm just like, it is amazing. And so I started to study the prepper mentality of this, and that's exactly what this is. And so when I kind of started to think about this, is that the prepper mentality is that they're prepping for an end. And they tend to look at this like, I need to have enough water. I need to have enough dried food or whatever. And they're prepping for 3 years or 2 years or a year and a half or whatever the time frame is. And they have each other looking on how much they are, and I'm going, you're not going to be able to prep, because here's what I want you to go backward here. So we're going to look back here for a second. So bloody seas, rivers of blood, killing heat, darkness of pain, crops burning, demons on the loose. It sounds like a really bad song, right? And I'm going, God's going, you ain't gonna prep enough to do this. So if you got enough water and everything's all going correct, but then your crops burn, everything. What if on your area your crops burn? So all of your prepping work doesn't work. That's what these people are. These are people who are very self sufficient. They've known about the end, and they prepped for all of their life. And this is what's coming for them. This is the type of person that is doing this. They're exactly what's in Matthew 22, 1 through 14. Exactly. They have prepping activities, and they all come for naught. But they didn't do it, which means that they're not believers at the time frame of this time frame, and they're totally prepped, and they're going, we're prepped for this. This is exactly what we prepped for. And they go, you didn't prep for this, buddy. And then it says in Luke 12:47, and they'll be severely beaten. And you go, severely. Severely beaten means scourged. Scourged means martyrdom. But martyrdom of this type means that they will go through this. To pull this off the screen, they will have public execution. This is one of the oldest, this is one of the very last executions that we're actually a picture of. Public executions. I believe that we'll see public executions. Now, there is a picture, and I don't have it right now. I wish I did. I wish I could show it to you. That there are, from time frames that if I showed it to you, they would really bother you. And they're more in the eastern areas and more in Turkey during World War One. In the middle of World War One, they were hanging Christian girls in around 13, 14, 15 years old to actually exterminate whole villages. And they would hang these Christian girls nude, and they were hanging them on crosses. And I discovered this probably 5 to 10 years ago. I don't remember exactly when. And I'm like, this cannot be real. And this is what they did. This is what Islam did to exterminate Christian girls. And you're just like, I can't believe it. This is what will happen more and more and more during the tribulation. But here's what I want you to see. Romans 8:28 says that we're called we're called for a purpose. But it's using the exact words of kaleo for a purpose. I believe that this verse, while it has a meaning for us today, it will have way more meaning in the end times than it has for us. Oops, sorry, click on the wrong area. It says Christ comes for his called, chosen, and faithful. To be kaleo means to be called, bidden out. I want you to understand another way of seeing that. To be called and bidden out means to be called out of a crowd. It's like to be called out of your classroom. If you were thinking about being in your classroom, like your teacher calls you out and you're going to be called to the principal's office. That terrifying moment of being called to the principal's office, that's a little bit like what it is. These people will be called to the principal's office, and they have to give an accounting for their life in front of God and country, in essence. And they will give an account. They're not going to die in a corner necessarily. They might, but they're giving an account for Christ, and they will be cheered on through eternity. They're not going to do this just for the heck of it. They're doing it for, we are going to be cheering them on throughout eternity. We are going to be cheering on them afterward. They have a place of honor. There are 5 crowns that are available for them, that they will have, we probably won't have. They're prepping for an end, but they won't be able to get to that end. This is a powerful group. Now, many of these people will never make it. So Matthew 22:3-8 says, the servants were summoned, those invited, like I told you about, were invited to the banquet, but they didn't want to come. The banquet was ready, but they were invited, but they were not worthy. Not worthy, not because they were bad, they just were not ready. 1 Corinthians 1:8, he will also strengthen you to the end, so that you will also be blameless. Angelikos. It is a negative particle of kalikos, or chosen. They're the called, they'll be strengthened in that way. They'll be strengthened for their end. This is a strengthening for the called. The called will be strengthened for their end. 2 Timothy 1:19, he has saved us and called us according to his holy calling, not according to our works, according to his purpose and grace. Again, we can get some meaning out of these verses. Don't get you wrong, okay? Don't get me wrong on this point about, but as the bride, we can see this, but there are there are dual meanings, dual layers to these verses, that those people at that time frame are going to be speaking these verses to over one another. 2 John 1:8. Watch yourselves so that you don't lose what you have worked for, but that you may receive the full reward. It's an admonition about losing one's salvation. I guarantee you they're going to be saying these verses to one another. The called salvation, Revelation 14:8. Then I saw another angel flying overhead, having the eternal gospel to announce the inhabitants of the earth to every nation, language, and people. That angel is going to be talking to the people along with the two witnesses. And he's going to be saying to those people, I've got this thing for you. That angel is going to be coming to those people, calling them out, just like in in Matthew 22, 1 through 14. That's what it is. You guys, if you should be encouraged by these verses, because some of your friends and family members are just like the Kaleo here. Let's talk about the harvest points. The barley harvests. The barley harvest is the easiest of the harvest. The wheat harvest is the second harvest, and the grape harvest is the third point of the harvests. The barley harvest comes through at the first harvest. The second harvest is the second harvesting that comes through in the summertime, in the midpoint. And the last one is a much more violent harvest that comes through, and you have to cut the grapes, and it's a more permanent, it's a different time of harvest. Those harvests exists, and they're talked about in scripture. Why can't we see those as the three harvest points? Okay, so let's do those timelines again. We got the bride, first harvest, the barley harvest. Ezekiel 38, the 38 and 39 war, the first seal, the false prophet, the image of the beast. This is during the chosen time frame, right? The mark of the beast. This is the third world war. And then the third seal with the famine and the hyperinflation. And then the fourth seal. So as a quarter of the planet is dead, the called are going through their own death. So the 144,000 began at this time frame, and they're going through severe deception, but the chosen are coming on in this time frame as well. And Satan has to be made God at this time frame in front of everyone. That's part of the severe deception. Excuse me. The trumpet, the hail of fire. Second trumpet with a comet, the meteor, the trumpet, the third of the darkening, and then the fifth trumpet. This is the zombie trumpet I always talk about, the curse of the mark. Okay, and then the sixth trumpet, which is another world war. This is the third of the planet dying. This is going to be another 1.5 billion dying. Okay, so then we'll talk about the remnant. You know, as I bring up this group called the Remnant, as I bring up this group called the Remnant, I'm always reminded of how prophets speak. I hear prophets say, you know, remnant, the remnant, the bride, the church, and it's like they're speaking almost as this stream of consciousness back and forth, and they're speaking, and they just move between these words as if Those are the words from God. And I'm like, dude, that's not how God would speak to you. And they go, well, how do you know that? I'm like, because the word doesn't speak that way. There are times that when God is speaking, he's speaking to that's a different group of people. The remnant is to a very specific group of people. And let's talk about who that is, so you know that isn't you. That remnant is in Isaiah 62 2. The nations seeing righteousness, being the Lord's mouthpiece. The nations of righteousness, that's definitely um, to the Jews. Daniel 7:25, oppressed holy ones, changing laws, handed over to the Antichrist, Antichrist for 3.5 years. Jews. Hosea 5:15, depart, return when they recognize their guilt and search in their distress. That is absolutely a hallmark, if you will, of the Jews, of the time frame in that they're going to be seen as. Zephaniah 3:13, no longer sin, no deceit, lie down in green pastures, not being afraid. That's what they will be in the millennial reign. Zechariah 10:2, always seeking but no comfort, wandering like sheep, suffering without a shepherd. That is what they're going to feel like. And that's frankly what the Jews have felt like for a very long time. But that's what they're going to feel like, especially in the that 3.5, specifically throughout the whole 7-year period of time. Micah 5:8, the remnant of Jacob, among the nations, a lion among sheep, no one to rescue. Psalms 23, the Lord is a shepherd, shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. That those are pastors. I mean, excuse me. Those are verses that make that we can utilize today, and yet they were written by David. That was spoken to the Jews and spoken about how the Jews actually feel. Hebrews 11:2, faith of Abraham, the grains of sand by the seashore. Those are verses that were spoken about, that were spoken from times past to times in the future. That was a promise about the Jews. They were not a promise for the church. They're not promises for the bride. They were promises of Abraham's specific seed. How about Second Chronicles? If my people will humble themselves, pray, seek my face. Okay. And my people who are called by my name humble themselves, pray, seek my face, and turn from their evil ways. Then I will hear from heaven and forgive their sin and heal their land. Right. So let's just detail that one. If my people will humble themselves, pray, seek my face. Who are his people? Well, specifically in that time frame, Solomon's talking. Who is Solomon talking about? Well, he's talking about the Jews, right? Humbling themselves, the Jews. Why? Because at the time frame when Solomon's talking about, they're not humble at that moment in time, right? Turn from their evil ways. You see, when in Romans 7, 14 through 25, we were talking about this, right? We were kind of mentioning this. Let's just talk about Romans. Let's use what Romans 7:14. Sorry, I have to say it like For we know that the law is spiritual, and I'm made out of flesh, sold to the power of sin. For I do not understand what I'm doing, but I do not practice what I want to do, but I do what I hate. But if I do not do what I want to do, I agree that the law is good. Basically, when you're doing that kind of thing, this is what every single believer throughout biblical time frames of the early church all the way through the church age, and then even through the tribulation time frame, are going to have to come to this answer of turning from their evil ways. They're going to have to do that and come to that salvation point, right? In the tribulation, they're going to have their situation stripped away from them until they finally go, you know what? I just can't do this anymore. And unfortunately, that's what they supposedly needed, right? The bowl judgments are just so dramatic. You see, some of the trumpet ones, a third of the grass goes, but the bowl judgments like rips every single thing away, right? So, and then I will hear from heaven and forgive their sin, right? So in that circumstance, what I believe that's going to happen is that they that Jesus steps from the plant from heaven. He steps, and this is Revelation 14:14, Revelation 14:16. He steps from the planet, or from heaven, excuse me. I hear from heaven. He has got a crown on his head. So fascinating. And he's up in the heavens. This is Philippians 2:11. Every eye will see him. Every tongue will confess that Jesus is Lord. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone will believe on him in salvation, but everyone will confess that Jesus is Lord, but some will come to salvation. It says that the Jews, and we'll talk about that in a second, will come to salvation. That's the last third. Now, here's the fascinating part. I will forgive them of their sin. See, I think in that last moment in time, he's seen in heaven. And first, he's going to draw away the called. The called are the ones, this last point in time. The called are taken away, that last point. The called are coming in. They have spent all of their time frame living through the martyrdom, but they're going to be seen in heaven, and they're going to be taken away in that last point of rapture point. And so we'll talk about that a little bit. So the Jews come to Jesus in that last point. Hosea 1:10. Isaiah 10:22. We could talk about this 100 ways and a million ways. That there is a commonality that the remnant come to salvation. So many different ways that we talk about this. Romans 11:25. A partial hardening has come to Israel until the full numbers of Gentiles has come in. And in this way, all Israel will be saved. Now, it doesn't mean that they won't go through a very horrible, tough time and heal their land. I've been thinking about this so long. That healing of their land today, what happens, I believe that land, when you look at that word, I believe that it means farther, that the land is, see, I think today some people think of it as the land is America, but I really think it's all of the earth. Sorry, let me back up here. Sorry. Let me back up here. See, we can use this verse just for us, But I really believe that when you really look at it, I mean, we can claim this verse for us, but and if we want to, and that's fine. But really, I believe that it actually does. If you look at the Hebrew understanding, it actually means when the Jews come to full understanding, it's going to be for the whole earth. So when the Jews come to full understanding, I believe that it will come and it will heal the whole planet. Okay, so let's jump into the sheep. Now, it's actually funny because the sheep actually have their own understanding. Now, the parable of the sheep are very fascinating because it comes alongside of the church as well. And so that's why people talk about the sheep quite a bit. Now, 1 Corinthians 3:13. It's very interesting. There's really interesting verses about that. 1 Corinthians 3:13. Um, each one's work will become obvious for that day, that for the day will disclose it, meaning the final day, because it will be revealed by fire. Fire will test the quality of one's work. And if one's work was built and it survives, he will receive a reward. But if anyone's work is burned up, it will be lost. He'll be saved, but it'll be like he's escaped through the fire. See, I think that there's going to, and there also is going to be a group, and we'll talk about this group as we're going to go through here. This group also is going to get saved. There's a secondary group that will be saved along with the remnant, and this is called the nations. And these are also these people will go through the millennial reign. But see, they'll get saved, but they have no other works around them. Now, the shepherd group also will claim that same thing. See, if you know anything about sheep, and by the way, I've spent a lot of time around sheep because I had pigs around me. And when we had our little stalls for pigs, guess what? The sheep are right beside us. They're the dumbest creatures you ever deal with. They're very, very timid. But the one thing the sheep have, they're always looking for a peaceful place to lie down. Okay? And they also hear their shepherd's voice. I mean, took me so much effort to get my pigs over to wash them because you had to wash them before, and they love to be washed, by the way. They love to be cleaned. But all you had to do for a sheep is they would open their cage and I would see the girl that would have the sheep, and she just walked down the area and she'd go, "Hey, come on." And the sheep would hear it, shoot, and shoot right down the area and go right toward her. And that's where I understood the sheep would listen to her shepherd. That's exactly, and shoot right down it. That is why they would hear the calling of the shepherd. That is such a gorgeous message. If you read John 10:1-6. And in Matthew 24:40, the reason why Matthew 24 is all about end time issues. And see, Jesus says, I go after the one sheep. If you have 100 and or the 99 and the one goes off, Jesus is talking all about this. I mean, I know I'm going through this fast, but I could spend forever talking about each one of them. Jesus, even though he's already had the bride and the chosen and the call, at the very end, near the very end of the tribulation, he's standing in the clouds and he's calling out for the last ones, the remnant and the remnant and the nations, or the sheep. And he's calling out and he's going after the last group of people who are going to be saved. And this is the group. They're called the nations in Revelation 19:15. They're Gentiles. It's called in Zechariah 14:16, it's called the survivor nations. Oh my gosh, guys, you got to see. We're not the sheep. I see people in churches call us the sheep. That is an insult to the church. You are not the sheep. You are the bride of Christ. The difference is in sheep nations. The remnant are like the sheep because they believe late. But the millennial reign was created for Adam's descendants, but they're so close to it, but it's not really like that. The survival of the millennial reign is the salvation before the end of the tribulation. But again, the sheep and the nations are so much alike, but the remnant, what I believe the remnant is, the remnant actually has a calling that is but they're going to come at the same time frame. They're going to come to belief at that very last point at Rosh Hashanah. It's 10 days before. They come to belief 10 days before the end of the millennial reign. And what they're going to do, they're actually their whole thing in the millennial reign. And you can listen to this in my Hope in the Last Day series. But here's what they do. What they have is they're the priests in the millennial reign. It's so amazing. The nations, though, are described in the Old Testament, but the New Testament actually says that they have a separation, and it's in Matthew 25 and 26. There's a separation of the sheep and goats, and it's in this interim period, a 45-day interim period that talks about in Daniel 11 and 12, this interim weird 45 days after the tribulation and before the millennial reign really starts up. Okay. But it has to be another group before the millennial reign and into there's a feast of the nations. So it's a very different kind of feast point. Now, let's talk a little bit about sheep. Okay. They're not the smartest animal. I've had people try to argue with me, but anyone who spent any time around them, they're not the smartest smartest animal in the group. Okay, but they definitely hear the call of their master. They require quite a bit of security. They need a fence line. Okay, the church is absolutely not the sheep. But they're not smart. But here's the thing, and that's why I'm going to tell you. I focused a huge amount of the book called. I'm going to pull this off the screen here. My guy in this book, foretold. You can get this on Amazon, but you can get this at Dr. Jeff Swanson on his site. It's called planbible.com, and you can kind of buy both the Foretold and Foretold Book 1 and Foretold Book 2. You can buy that on there, but it was the focus of the whole book series. And one of the things that happens in there is that we focus on this gentleman, Nathan, and he is that character that goes right through it. And again, he goes all the way through the millennium. I mean, he goes all the way through the tribulation. He just isn't. He's so blinded through this, and some, and you kind of think, well, is he that smart? He's just blinded. That's just really the case with that. Okay. Now the goats, and we're going to talk about the goats here in a second, but I want to differentiate them a little bit right now. Okay. They're a devious animal with a bad mood. If you don't know anything about them, I've spent a lot of time around goats because I was around them. Okay. They will eat anything. They will eat 10 cans if you're not careful with them. God chose these animals to explain people. To explain it to people. I was talking to a university professor at Oral Roberts, and he said that most of the kids that he talks to today have never really been on the farm or on the ranch. And So I'm gonna grab a drink here. And he said one of the kids tried to use an analogy of cats and dogs instead of sheep and goats. And he goes, I failed the kid. I'm like, dude, of course you did. Because that's dumber than spit. You cannot use sheep and goats and cats and dogs. Because that is dumber than spit to utilize that kind of analogy. Because if you lived in the 1450 versus 1850 versus today, 1950, 1990, you could utilize the analogy of sheep and goats and the chosen, and you could utilize the or bride, you could utilize these analogies and they would stand the test of time versus try to update the thing by some eclectic point, right? Some modernized wording. And it's pretty dumb to use modernized wording with that too. I'm going to jump into this one, but this group are actually teachers and evangelists who've walked away from Jesus. Let's get into this group called the false teachers. Let's get into the parable of this. And I used this picture. I bought this picture. It's such a powerful picture. In Matthew 24:35. Let's kind of talk about this. And I see people who mess this up. The foolish versus the wise virgins. You got the 5 wise and the 5 foolish virgins. Okay? So they're and you go the virgins. And people don't understand who they are. They're the brides. They're 10 brides. Because you go virgins. No, no. They're waiting for their groom. Do you get it? They're virgins. They've never had sex with a man. They've got their engagement capability. They've already had the dowry placed, and they've had their lamp on their window seal. But they had their wick put in, their lamp created. So they have in essence, from the spiritual analogy, they have a new, in essence, lamp skin that we talk about. You talk about all the way through the Gospels. So they have a new soul, right? A new spirit, but they don't have any oil. But the foolish ones have drained out their oil, which means the Holy Spirit, or in another way of looking at this, they have drained out the Word of God. Now, I utilize a online one. It's actually by Olive Tree Study Bible, and I've downloaded a long time ago HCSB one that has the Strong's Concordance. Okay, and so and I have just a bunches and bunches of notes. Okay, I mean I could show you how many notes in here, but they're literally probably about 500 notes, and I sync them to my computer, sync them to my iPhone and my iPad, and I'm working on my notes every other day, something like that, right? And so I'm working through my notes all the time. Now, so the wise and the foolish virgins are brides. Okay? The only difference is that the foolish ones are asking for the word of God, in essence, or the Holy Spirit from the wise ones. And they're going, you can't get it from me. You got to go to the city, essentially, or to heaven to get it from him. Not, you can't get it from me. Because at first I thought, well, what can't you just get it from the other person, because you can't get the word, or you can't get it from any other person. I can't get the Holy Spirit or the word from another person. I got to get it from only from God. I remember when I first read it, I was like, why can't you just dump out a little bit of your oil No, you can never do that. It's a complete misunderstanding of the word, right? The analogy is such a powerful analogy if you don't pour yourself into it. I've seen people misuse the 10 virgins over and over and over again because they don't understand the power of this one. And I could preach it for 1,000,000,000 years if I wanted to, right? But the foolish virgins actually indicate at the very end of it that the wise virgins go in to their wedding ceremony. The foolish virgins have a very interesting point. You know what they actually have? Into outer darkness where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. The outer darkness is only made for goats. Every time you see this outer darkness with weeping and gnashing of teeth, it's for goats. You're going to see it. It's over and over again. It's their only destination. Now, that destination will come into play, and that they will actually come out of there, and you'll see them go to the white throne judgment. But it's very interesting that they keep going to this very consistent destination point. Okay. Then you actually have, in the same kind of point, like within seconds later, um, because Jesus is speaking, Matthew 25, 1 through 13, and then he goes right afterward. I mean, like seconds later, he gives another analogy. He's already talking. Matthew 24 is end time stuff. And then Matthew 25 is only minutes later, he's talking. So it's end time related. He talks about the unfaithful servants of talents. So he talks about the guy with 5 talents, he gains 5 more. The guy with 2 talents gains 2 more, right? And then he talks about the guy with 1 talent who buries it in the ground. And the guy with 1 talent has to give it to the one with the 10 talents, right? Or he loses it. And what happens to the guy with the 1 talent that loses it? He goes to outer darkness with weeping and gnashing of teeth. He goes the same place as the foolish virgins, a goat. Oh, dude. In John 15, 6 and 7, by the way, John 14 was talking about if I go and prepare a place for you, behold, I'm going to come back and get you. Talking about, I'm going to come back and get you. Well, then in John 15, he's talking about, we are the vine, I am the vine, you are the branches, right? Stick inside of me, don't like move outside of you. But if you're useless, I'm going to cut you off and throw you in the fire. You're burned in the fire. That's another conversation of goats, what they do to goats. Luke 12:46, in that same conversation we talked about earlier, where Luke 12:47, Luke 12:48, where they talked about the chosen and the chosen and the called. Well, to Luke 12:46, well, let's just use that one again for you. Ready? Luke 12:46. Sorry, I'm not going to do it as fast as you are. That slave, again, this is someone who used to follow Christ, will come on a day that he does not expect him, and an hour that he does not know. He will cut him to pieces and assign him to a place of unbelievers. This is a person who used to believe in Christ. He used to have a renewed spirit, but he's assigned a place of unbelievers. This is someone who actually believed in Christ, but he didn't expect him. Luke 13:22. He didn't follow the narrow way. Oh, and this one, oh my gosh. Prodigal son. Let me just walk this one through just a little bit. Ready? Okay. So you got the prodigal son. So you got the father and the two sons. So you got the one who goes off and does his own thing, right? And the focus, most people want to focus on the prodigal son, where he goes away, spends all his money, and he comes back. And he gets the fatted calf, right? Who's the fatted calf one? So and by the way, the whole focus is the father with this guy. Well, guess what he is? He's the sheep. This isn't anything about a bride, because the bride isn't any related to this one. Because guess what? Remember the separation of the sheep and goats, and they're going to have a separation of them. So the sheep is the one who spent all of his money, has nothing left. All he was hoping for is to eat with the pigs. Man. But at the end, he gets a celebration at the wedding. Not the it doesn't come at the wedding banquet. There's actually a banquet that happens in the millennial reign. It's really cool. It's a wedding. I'm sorry. It's a banquet that happens. It's a feast that happens only in the millennial reign, but it only happens when there's a separation after the sheep and the goats. That's what the prodigal son separation is. That's what the prodigal son conversation is about. But here's what the weird one is that no one spends any time on. The other dutiful, they call him the dutiful son, and I disagree heartily with that. He sticks with the father, but he's kind of a pissy boy. And he sticks with the father for a while. But at the very end, he actually says he's kind of mad. And he says, sorry to pause everything because the dogs are about ready to kill the delivery man. Okay. Anyway, so they you got the guy, and he comes to the father. And the father's about ready to have this major feast with the fatted calf. But here's the powerful statement. He goes, "How come you didn't give me," ready? "How come you never gave me a goat to have a feast with my friends?" And I'm like, about 2 years ago, I read that. And I'm normally, like, I have my really heavy study time right over here with my iPad, and have my setup here, right? And I'm like, "Oh, buddy." And I'm like freaking, and I'm like, and it's normally like super early in the morning on Sunday. Sorry, I messed myself up. And I'm like, so I have a whiteboard, two whiteboards over here, and I'm starting drawing on the whiteboard, like, and I'm like, is that really what I read? And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. And I'm like, it is the goat. And the father is imploring him to come in to the feast. Again, it's not the wedding feast, but he doesn't want to come in. This is the separation, the prodigal story. He gives him the rings on his fingers, a robe on and he gives the prodigal son, the son, right? The and by the way, it's a son, not a not the bride. It's a son to the father, who's the sheep, because he's going to be in the millennial reign, right? So it's talking about the nations or the sheep versus the goat, and the goat just wanted a goat, right? The what you call the dutiful son, but that's not how the Bible calls it. And Jesus is talking about this. Oh, guys, you got to catch how gorgeous it is. This this analogy is giving you some deep information, and that's why you got to read it in Matthew and Luke, and you got to read both of them, and you will see the depth of scripture. And by the way, if you want to understand this even deeper, I write about this in The Wedding of Jesus. You can read this on in drscottyoung.com. The Wedding of Jesus, this book that goes into it. Invitations have been set. Okay. Now, the nature of brides versus goats. And this also talks about this in that book. The bride is the desire to have complete intimacy with his creation, which means sexual intimacy, right? Now, we talked about a story of the shoemaker. I don't want to get into this one again, but basically, we have the shoemaker. The shoemaker wants to make shoes for the wedding guests around. The completion of the cross, the work on the cross, that is the dowry that we have, right? The dowry is the blood of the cross, is the making of the cross. So that's what happens for us. The sex is the completion, is the connection that we have with one another and the spouse. Something that happens in the spiritual sense with the Lord. Okay. And only Jesus explains this, is that's the mystery. That's the mystery part, right? And so many times Satan has tried to corrupt this, right? Versus the goats. It is a devious animal. We talked about this. It's always in a bad mood. Baby goats are kind of cute when you watch them. But if you ever seen an older goat, they are devious things. God chooses this animal very specifically. Okay. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the goats in the wedding. And then we're going to talk about this again. And we're going to go over to this area here in Matthew 22. And I used this analogy before. And we're going to use this Matthew 22, 5, verse 5. In verse 5, this is the ones where it's talking about the wedding feast. Okay. We talked about this earlier on. But they paid no attention and went their way, one to his farm and another to his business. And that would be to the called. Okay, so they did their own thing. And others seized their slaves and treated them outrageously and killed them. Now that would be partly to the goats. And the king was outraged, sent his troops and destroyed the murderers and burned down their cities. Okay, so that would be some that the king is really upset with. Now, that would be some of the wicked that he would do to. Now, verse 12 and 13 is really, really interesting. Verse 12. So when the verse 11 talks about when he walks around and he sees the people in the wedding. He says, so he said to them, friend, how did you get in here without your wedding clothes? I'm sorry, it was actually verse 11 and 12, not 12 and 13. But when the king came into view of the guests, he saw the man who was there not dressed for a wedding. And he said, how did you get in here without your wedding clothes? And the man was speechless. And then he says in verse 13, he says, tie him up and throw him out of outer darkness where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. And you say, well, he just doesn't have his right clothes on. And And so let me kind of pause here for a second. And so some people go like, I was at a funeral of a pastor, and it was his son's funeral, and it was his 10-year-old son's. Is a friend of mine actually too. And the guy came in with like jeans on, and I put on a suit and stuff like that. And I'm like going, this is your pastor. It's just a friend of mine's. And I'm like, you could put a suit on? I was kind of irritated at him. But that's not what the word says. The guy walked in naked. He doesn't just walk in without his, nicer clothes and jeans and holy jeans and, kind of messed up and kind of, just all dorky. He walks in naked to the wedding feast. Let's go on further. Again, every time it gets into this, they always bring up the destiny as outer darkness, and they're outer darkness until the white throne. One of the interesting parts that happens that most people don't understand about ranching is there's an interesting part about a goat, what they do to what's called a Judas goat. So they train up a goat to do this to other, whether they do sheep or goats, but specifically to sheep. And what they do is they train a goat, a Judas goat, to lead them into the slaughter area. And because and so other goats or sheep will actually walk behind this Judas goat, who like, and they call it the Judas goat, and they walk in, but no other animal will do this except for a goat. And so they lead the sheep in. Specifically, it's really done for mostly for sheep, but this Judas goat will lead the sheep in and lead them in to the slaughterhouse. It's just so amazing how this actually happens in reality. But the one area that started to get me really off on this particular particular topic is Jude 1, and there's only one chapter in there, is 18 and 19. Yep. Okay. So flip to it if you want to. I'd really like it if you did, but it's verse 18 and 19. But they told you in the end time there will be scoffers walking according to their ungodly desires. Now, if you read it, scoffers, some of you guys will have in there, oops, sorry, you'll have in there scoffers. Other ones will see it as mockers. But that isn't actually how the word reads it. And it calls them scoffers, mockers, but there's another way to call it, and there's another way of saying it. It's called false teachers. Let's use the word of way. Will be false teachers walking according to their ungodly desires. Ungodly desires isn't the best way of saying it. It's not the worst way of saying it. It's just one way of saying it. So you could say that verse and say, there will be false teachers walking according to their say here, how would say that, to their wicked lust. There are false teachers walking according to their wicked lusts. How amazing is that? These people will create divisions and are unbelievers. Let me pull this off the screen here. I want you to listen to me closer. Are unbelievers not having the Spirit? And I pause there because unbelievers is such a funky word there. Now, a very, very long time ago, I was in this one church in Tulsa, and we were in an old Walmart. And in this old Walmart, I'm trying to remember it in my head here. I'm kind of looking off the distance here. So we're in this old Walmart, and there was an ATM in the kind of corner area because because it was old Walmart parking lot. And we used to get there like really, really early because it was awesome worship, right? And so like we got there like nasty late. So we're stuck in the back of the church, right? And so some dude, which I have no idea why he walks in this late. Now he's got a demon spirit. You could just sense it because we were so close to the back of the church. Dude walks in and pastor's up there speaking. And he goes, "You guys call yourself Christians, and you blocked out the ATM," and he starts just going on, and he goes on for like 2 or 3 minutes until he finally realizes how stupid he sounds, and he walks out the back door. Now I'm embarrassed, and then I kind of go, no, and the pastor's like, "I'm sorry, sir. I'm so sorry. We'll get that cleaned up," and he's embarrassed too. But what do you say to that? Right? And I thought about that a lot. I mean, and I never forgot it. And I thought, okay, could that guy who's not even a part of the church, now we actually cordoned off the little spot so no one would ever mess up his ATM ever again, but could that guy really create a division inside of that church? No. Like he's not even part of the church. He's not part of the church. Can't create a division, right? So think about that for a second. Who can create a division inside of a church? Not someone outside of the church. Someone has to be inside of the dang church to create a division, correct? It's never outside, it's inside of the church. And so some people go, well, so it's a false teacher has to be not a believer. And I'm like, no, okay, it says an unbeliever. And yet, if you say an unbeliever, the word would be pisteo. Pisteo, you would say a pisteo. Pisteo means believer, or a pisteo, which means anti-believer. That's not what it said. It says this word called, it says a word called psychikos. And the word psychikos, I'm like, oh, I have no idea what the word means, right? Psyche, which is the word psych, where we get the word psychology, and kos. And I'm like, so I'm looking this up everywhere. And so Aristotle pulls that word in and he puts this word under psychology, but he puts this word more specifically under psychosis. Now, in psychosis, my wife's a psych nurse, and she's talked to me a lot. And I've had a lot of psychology background because I'm an audiologist, right? And so I'm like, I'm like sitting there going, okay, psychosis. When you have psychotic patients, I've had psychotic patients quite a bit of time. And psychotic patients, they're not in reality. I've had patients that come in and I had one of my favorite psychotic patients, super nice, but she was giving me crap because she thinks I'm her cardiologist, but I'm really her audiologist. And she would always get like messed up with who I was. And, so she'd like, you got to give me the right medication. Or, I'm like, I'm your audiologist. Or her sister would always like, this is your audiologist, not your cardiologist. And, like, oh, okay. And that kind of stuff happened to me a lot, and get on the right, path before she'd understand that. That's kind of that thing. So it's not split personality. It's just, that they're in their wrong, state of mind in essence, right? And that kind of psychosis happens. But the psychikos word here, and it says they're unbelievers not having the Spirit. So these people create divisions, are unbelievers or psychikos. They're not having the Spirit. So in essence, what these goats do, they poured out their spirits. They're false teachers. They're spiritually psychotic. They've created the psychotic things. And here's what happens. There's um there's a guy named Mike Winger who is talking about this quite a bit. And if you haven't seen some of this stuff, you're seeing it on stage quite a bit in this time frame. Talking about false teachers quite a bit. And he's talking about it, but he's not saying this exact word, but this spiritual psychotic nature. And you're seeing some of these people out there that are displaying this exact psychotic nature. And you're seeing these false prophets and false teachers. And I'm like, they are goats. They're actual, they have lost the spirit, they have poured it out. And they have more related to Satan than they do of God. And Jude speaks about him all over the book. And they need to be cut off from the church and burned in the fire. That's like what the word says about them. And I want to walk through this equation with us too. So a child of God, Father through the Jesus's blood, has a growth and a comfort. Then it moves into the church. Now, here's what happens. He's betrothed, or she is betrothed, goes into the promises of God, then can move into Jesus, right? And that is that bride, that co-inheritance, and that in then what our goal is to see the children. Our goal is to have the inheritance, to have the child, those children underneath us, right? But unfortunately, one of the things that happens, some people will exit out of those phases, and the exit will be the goat point. Or they can stay in that kind of thing. They exit out. The church can exit and be goats, unfortunately. Or you can stay in that bride kind of point. So we have people who exit out of this, and they go in here, and they go into this phase, and they go into this place here, and they kind of stay here in the church, but they exit and they go into the goat phase. Or they can kind of go all the way through here. But some people go all the way through here, go into this point, and then they exit at this point, and they're really sad. Some people go backward all the way through here. And I know this sounds like a funky kind of thing. You could probably, snap a picture of this and play around with this quite a bit, because I could preach this for a long, long time. But people walk through the phases. They've gone through this many times, and then they back up, and then they go right through here, but they've never washed themselves long enough in the Word. You need to constantly wash yourself in the Word and stay in the Word, or you lose it. Let's get into the friends a little bit further as we find out more about who talks to us. And again, now on to our very last group, the friends. And this is probably the least well-known ones. I mean, there are worship songs that are about, I am the friend of God, and there's so many ones out there, but are we the friend of God? It doesn't mean that you can't be the friend. For instance, when you have a spouse, I'm going to kind of come off the screen here for this. My wife is my absolute best friend. You're supposed to be that. Um, and that is the best way that you make it through. Now for me, it's past 33 years. But you're supposed to have that level of physical intimacy mental and psychological intimacy, all those kinds of levels of intimacy. But when you go to the level of intimacy that comes in friendship, the writers of the gospel are the are and the Old and New Testament actually have a different level of response. Let's show you a little bit about that. Again, where do you see the groups? You see the groups in the called, chosen, and faithful. You know, the kaleo, ekletos, pistos. We see that all the way through the New Testament. But who is the bride? They're the faithful. Again, the millennial timeline. This is where we get a little bit funky. Again, we talked about this. This is in Daniel 11 and 12. And where it says, is that those who can make it this really odd time frame of a time frame, and it goes, if it makes you can make it to a certain time frame of days, and there's this 45 days, and what most prophecy people have kind of correctly looked at it is it's an extra 45 days. If you can make it to that extra 45 days, then you're in good shape. Now, in that 45 days, what we have found is that there's a sheep and goats separation. And now what we also see in that time frame is that there's a probability of of all the Old Testament saints arising. And so that they will have resurrections, the Old Testament saints, but I also believe that the friends have this, and we'll talk about the friends here in a second. Now, in the millennial reign, there's a growth and prosperity of those people. The only people who are living through, physically living, are the people who are the remnant and the nations. Both of them are identified in the New and the Old Testament as the sheep in different ways. Okay. Now, Israel is the center of the world. Now, what's fascinating when you understand this is that the governor, or actually the mayor, in essence, is real interesting. The mayor of Israel is Jesus, which is such an interesting thing. So his seat is in Israel. But what's weirder is that David is the governor of Israel. And so you're kind of like, wow, that's weird, right? Well, that's fine. Now, it says that we rule and reign with Christ. So therefore, the Old Testament saints are all over the planet, but so are we. We're somewhat ruling and reigning in different ways. Now, there are celebration feasts happening. Now, I think those celebration feasts are happening in the early portion, but we also celebrate the feasts. And so we celebrate the different feasts like Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and we'll also do the Feast of Tabernacles, where we're going to remember all the amazing things that happen in the time frame. So there's a really interesting points. Now we'll have a long life, and we'll have animal peace with it, which is such an amazing thing. And humans have actually been asking for this for a very long time frame in different ways. Sorry, I just spit on the screen. What a dummy. Okay. Now, here's the interesting point. Israel is the top of the heap, whereas the nations are the second. Okay. I believe that Israel is going to be are going to be the priests. Okay. And the nations are going to come up to Israel for the celebrations. Now, and then at the very end of the time frame, Satan will have a rebellion. It'll be a very short rebellion, incredibly short rebellion, and then the white throne judgment will come out. And if you've heard me talk about this, basically what happens is that Jesus has this little book, and it's called the book of it's in Revelation 13:8, and it is and it is the book of names, and basically in that book that it says your if your name is not written in this book in blood, then it will say, well, your name isn't written here. And these are people. And there's a pastor, or there's a person that walked up to Perry Stone, and he's like, "See you at the white throne judgment." And he goes, "No, no, no. Now, by the way, we will all be at the white throne judgment. Everyone will be at the white throne judgment. No, we'll be watching there, but it's for the wicked dead who come to this. They will be lined up here at the white throne judgment." But it will say your name is not written in the book. And basically, you haven't signed the contract for sin. And you'll be thrown into the lake of fire in that way. So you go down to the lake of fire, and then all of those things and death will be deleted at that point, and then there's a new heaven and a new earth. Okay, and death dies, and you have this circumstance. So where do we find the friends in Scripture? Well, Matthew 17, 10, 17, it's handed over the Sanhedrin to and flogged. So there's a real interesting kind of conversation. Where is that? Let's just kind of read that one. That's such an interesting conversation there. Let's bring it up here. So let's talk about that one, because that's an odd construction one. Because the people will hand you over to Sanhedrin and flog you in their synagogues, be aware of them. And what Jesus is talking about is he's talking only to his disciples. So he's obviously saying that they have a special statement, a special dispensation for these guys. In John 3:29, the bride has a groom. The groom's friend stands by and listens for him and rejoices at the voice of his friend, as at the voice that is being called out. And so he refers to the groom's friend who stands by and listens. Very interesting statement here. John 14, 1 through 6 and 10 says the father's way to the house. Now let's just kind of flip over to that one too. That's just another interesting statement. John 14, 1 through 6, your heart must not be troubled. Believe in God, believe in me. In the Father's house there are many dwellings. If not, I would have told you. I'm going to prepare the place for you. And if I go away, I prepare a place for you. I will come back and receive you to myself. This is a conversation to the church, and actually the bride. I'm doing a job building a house, right? And then he goes, you know the way to where I'm going. And then Thomas says, Lord, we don't know where you're going. And Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and life. No one comes to the Father except for me. And they're like, I don't get what you're talking about, right? So then in verse 10, he says, don't you believe that I am the Father and the Father is in me? For the words I speak, I do not speak, but on my own. The Father who lives in me does his work. So he's basically indicating that I am the way, the truth, and life. So through the words that are spoken out here, these guys were supposed to speak the words or write down the words that are indicated here. Okay. John 15, not slaves. Now, this is the most powerful verse out there. Let's flip over to that one. I do not call you slaves anymore. It's called doulos. A slave doesn't know the master's will. I have called you friends. I have made known to you everything I've heard from the Father. This is an elevation of these guys. So in essence, because most teacher relationship is a doulos, a slave kind of a tying kind of thing. That's how they would normally see that. In essence, don't think of it as slavery in essence. That would be an employer-employee relationship. That instead of you getting all sideways, some people get all sideways with that. That is an employee-employer relationship. A friend is an elevation like a cohort or a co-inheritance. And by the way, we also see this in and we also see this that they stand on the throne. They're the 24 elders. Now, this would be a representation of the Old Testament and the New Testament. So they're sitting on the throne right beside Jesus. So they're not just the slaves. Sorry, I went forward there too. Didn't mean to do that. They're not just like standing and in front of the throne, they're sitting with Jesus. That they have a special place with that too. That and why would they say their stuff is made known? No, they're not in that knowing, in that relationship of known, because when we talk about known, that is uh, a level of normally that when we talk about made known, that is a sexual known. That's not what this is, because when the word uses the word known, this is it's called knows. Basically, I'm not going to say it in Greek here. To be made known, to clarify or certify this word, to understand. And so, in essence, this is a completely different Greek word. And this is like off of the word gnosis. And so it's an understanding. So what happens is that the gospel writers and in essence all the epistle writers, or we would say the disciples and the apostles, actually had the ability to understand who Jesus is. And so they're the transmitters of God to us. So that's why every time I hear people who denigrate the word, I get really, really ticked off because they're the ones that tell us who the word is or what the word is about, right? In Jeremiah 30, verse 9 and 33, 15 and 16, David rules the people in peace from Jerusalem. David, even though he actually was, and there's a long conversation we can actually have about that, David actually was there's an interesting conversation about this. David actually had raped Bathsheba. David had killed, and a conspiracy to kill his wife, her husband, excuse me, had done a whole bunch of bad things, and yet was a man after God's own heart. Think about that for a second. And yet, still has a place in God's own heart. Okay. So the tradition of the wedding, we've talked about this before. The friends, who is that? The gospel writers introduce the groom to the bride. Why would the friends do this in a spiritual sense? Because they know Jesus. And they also know the bride, you and I, in essence. They're going, you know what? You need to know Jesus. So I'm going to tell you all about this. Okay. From the perspective, the prospective groom introduces the father and the dowry release. Right. So they're all a part of this thing. The commitment of the bride, we've talked about this, the lamp in the window waiting for the groom. The groom creates the house for the bride. That's John 14, with the father's permission. And the friends of the groom blow the trumpet. So it says from heaven, the trumpet, excuse me, the trumpet is blown. So in essence, the the how is that made? See, First Thessalonians 4:16. Who writes First Thessalonians? Paul. So in essence, the friends are the ones who tell it. And Paul even says, I'm going to tell you a great mystery. And he basically says, I'm telling you something that's never been told before. When you read First Thessalonians 4, he's going to tell you, I'm going to tell you something you've never heard about before, you've never even experienced. Wow. That's why he also is part of the friends. And the bride brings down and she shows that she's been faithful and she has been a virgin in essence. Faithful means a virgin. Okay. And there's a 7-day wedding feast, right? The whole thing. And they live 1 year or the millennial reign free in the house, which is the millennial reign kind of time frame. Okay. So in this kind of thing, we've talked all the way through and through about the circumstance. We've talked about the tribulation. So we talked about all of those 21 different judgment points. We talked about the groups. I hope you've gotten a clear viewpoint of it so that you can now be able to kind of go on and see what the tribulation is all about. And again, I want to kind of show you this, and I'm going to bring this up here on the screen. So I'm going to show you here on the screen. So if you were going to drscottyoung.com, you can do a couple different things, right? So you can go over here, you go to the website, and you can actually download a couple interesting things. You want to know, this is something, this is just a document I wrote. It's the false teachers of Jude. This is a document I wrote that you can kind of get an interesting kind of thing, and you can kind of go through a lot more information about that one. That's a real interesting one. But here's the judgments, the tribulation judgments. This is that cool thing that gives you some real interesting points here. Now, by the way, you can kind of redo that there. So you can go on to there and you can kind of download this particular thing. And if you have an extended a screen, you can be able to see it even better, but you can do it on regular screens too, and it can be a wallpaper that can stay on your computer. Okay, and so you can kind of see it a little bit better. So just have to put in your name, address, phone number, kind of thing. So you just kind of put it in there, and you can donate. That would be very helpful. But again, you can be able to do that. So then you can also see the books. Now, the first book on the bookstore is the Tribulation one. But you can also see the Rapture one, which is one of the books. You can see the 144,000. And then, by the way, this is the other book. I didn't even have one over here. This is the Voices Around the 144,000. This would be the fiction book of the first half of the tribulation. The Wedding of Jesus. What is that? This is about the sheep, the goats, and the bride. Okay, this is a Secret Zombie Life. It's not really relevant in this one, but this would be the second half of the tribulation. This would be about the called. So it's a little bit more interesting on that particular perspective, right? So that you have a little bit of more information. And I need to add the Foretold series that will kind of, add some more other information with that too. So I haven't added that one. So we need to be able to do that and be able to add some more fun stuff out there with that too. But again, there's some downloads that are free downloads you have. Also, we have the Hope in the Last Days download as well, to kind of give you some more fun information with that too. And again, as we always, it really would help if you go ahead and like and subscribe. Thank you so much for listening to the long video. I hope it helps you to understand the tribulation in ways that you haven't ever seen before. Thanks so much.